It was a Thursday evening in early autumn, the kind of day when the sun hangs a little lower in the sky, and the air starts to carry a quiet chill. The leaves were beginning to change, tinges of orange and red softening the edges of the neighborhood park tucked between rows of modest brick houses in a suburb outside Chicago. Michael's running shoes crunched softly on the gravel path, his breath steady, earbuds in place, the day's stress slowly melting away with every mile. He wasn't training for anything. Running had become more of a ritual than a goal, an act of maintenance, both physical and mental. At 42, Michael lived alone in a two-bedroom apartment nearby, worked as a systems analyst for a logistics company, and had learned to appreciate the predictability of his routine. He would run, shower, make dinner, maybe watch a documentary. No surprises, no interruptions. But that evening, as he rounded the final bend near the playground, something caught his eye, a small figure, nearly motionless, on one of the swings. Most of the kids had already gone home, their laughter and shrieks replaced by the distant bark of a dog and the faint rustle of wind through the trees. The playground was quiet, except for him. The boy sat there gently rocking back and forth, his hands clasped tightly around the chains of swing, his gaze fixed on the ground. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old. His jeans were dusty, his sweatshirt slightly oversized, sleeves swallowing his wrists. A tangle of dark brown hair covered most of his face, and the toes of his sneakers barely brushed the dirt below. Michael slowed down without thinking, pulling one earbud out and glancing subtly around the park. No adults nearby, no one on the benches, no parked cars with open doors waiting for a child to finish playing. It struck him then, not just the stillness of the scene, but the way the boy looked so profoundly out of place, like a faded photograph left in the middle of a bustling street. He passed the swing set and kept jogging a few paces before instinct pulled him to a stop. He turned his head back, staring again at the lonely figure. Something inside him stirred, something that had no place in his routine. He stood there for a moment, torn between the impulse to help and the fear of seeming intrusive or, worse, suspicious. It was the way the boy's shoes didn't move, Michael would later think. Kids on swings always kicked, always tried to fly. This one barely moved at all. With a soft exhale, Michael stepped off the path and approached the playground, his feet crunching over mulch and fallen leaves. The boy didn't react. He just sat there, the soft creak of the swing filling the silence. Michael stopped a few feet away, crouching slightly so he wasn't looming. "Hey," he said gently, not too loud. "You okay, buddy?" The boy's head snapped up, and for the first time Michael saw his face. Pale, streaked with dried tears, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. His lower lip trembled slightly, but he didn't say anything. Michael softened his voice even more. "Where's your family? Is someone coming to get you?" For a second, he thought the boy might bolt, but instead, something crumpled in his face. His shoulders sagged and his eyes welled up again, the tears coming fast now. He didn't sob, didn't wail, just cried quietly, like he'd done it before and knew how to do it without drawing attention. Michael's chest tightened. He took another small step closer, but kept his hands visible and his tone calm. "Do you want me to call someone for you?" The boy shook his head slowly, then whispered, "They forgot me." It came out so quietly that Michael wasn't sure he'd heard it right, but the words hit harder than any scream could have. "They forgot me." The kind of sentence that doesn't belong to a child's vocabulary. Michael crouched all the way down now, resting on his heels. He didn't speak immediately. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like a platitude or a lie. "What's your name?" he asked after a moment. The boy sniffled, brushing his sleeve across his face. "Ethan." "Hi, Ethan. I'm Michael." He paused, glancing around again. "Do you know if someone's supposed to pick you up?" Ethan nodded, eyes still down. "My stepdad, but he's late. Sometimes he doesn't come." Michael's fingers curled slightly, pressing into his palms. Something in Ethan's voice, flat, resigned, scraped at something buried deep in him. He didn't know what this boy's life looked like. Not really. But he knew the sound of disappointment worn too often, like a jacket that never quite fits but becomes familiar. "I don't want to go home alone," Ethan whispered. Michael nodded slowly. "You don't have to. I'll stay here with you, okay? Until we figure something out. Ethan looked up again, uncertain, eyes red-rimmed. But he didn't object. He just nodded once, tiny and quiet. Michael sat on the nearest bench, not too close, giving the boy space. He glanced at the setting sun, at the emptiness of the park, and at the boy who had said more before words than most adults did in entire conversations. He didn't know yet what he was going to do, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't walk away. Michael stayed seated on the bench, legs slightly apart, elbows resting on his knees as the daylight thinned, bleeding orange across the sky. The silence between him and Ethan was no longer heavy, just quiet, like a pause in a conversation that both people knew hadn't ended. The boy continued rocking gently on the swing, slower now, his hands still gripping the cold chains, as if letting go might mean something would fall apart. Michael didn't speak immediately. He knew how easily a wrong word could close someone up, and he had no intention of breaking whatever fragile sense of safety had settled between them. A breeze swept through the park, rustling the trees and causing the metal of the swing set to groan softly. Michael glanced at Ethan again. The boy's eyes were distant, staring somewhere past the ground, as though watching something only he could see. Michael shifted slightly, adjusting his weight on the bench, his voice calm and deliberate when he finally spoke. "Ethan," he said, not too loud, not too soft. "You hungry?" The boy blinked, surprised by the question. He looked up, unsure how to respond, as if trying to measure whether it was a real offer or just a way to fill the air. "I had a granola bar at lunch," he said, his voice flat, matter-of-fact. Michael nodded slowly. "That was hours ago." Ethan shrugged. "I'm used to waiting." Michael pressed his lips together for a moment. There were 100 things he could say to that, but none of them would mean anything right now. He looked down at his phone, tempted to call someone, maybe the school district, maybe child services, but hesitated. That step felt too large, too soon. He needed to ask the right question first. Something small, something human. After a few moments, he looked back at Ethan, his voice more direct this time. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Ethan's mouth twitched, not quite a frown. He didn't answer right away, and when he did, his voice was soft but without emotion, like reciting facts from memory. "Because when I do, it gets worse at home." Michael's stomach turned, but he didn't flinch. He looked at the boy carefully, reading the stillness in his posture, the practiced neutrality in his tone. It was a kind of answer that didn't come from a single bad day. It was learned, rehearsed, repeated. Worse how? Michael asked gently. Ethan didn't respond. His eyes dropped again and the swing stilled. After a long silence, he spoke again, more like a confession than an answer. "They say I make things up, that I try to get people in trouble, that I'm too sensitive." Michael let out a slow breath. He looked out across the empty field, the shadows growing longer now. A father and daughter passed on the far side of the park, laughing, the girl bouncing ahead, her backpack flapping behind her. The sound was distant, but it cut sharply through the quiet. Ethan watched them too, his eyes following the girl until she disappeared behind a tree line. Michael turned back toward him. "That's not being sensitive. That's just being a kid." Ethan didn't respond, but something in his shoulders loosened slightly. There was another long pause, the kind that invited reflection but didn't demand a response. Michael stood slowly, walked over to the swing next to Ethan, and sat down. The chain creaked under his weight. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. "You know," Michael said, eyes ahead, "when I was your age, I used to wait on this bench in front of my school. Every day, I'd sit there and tell myself, maybe today he'll show up on time." But most days he didn't. Ethan glanced at him, curious. "My dad," Michael clarified, "he always had an excuse. Traffic, work, or he just forgot." The boy didn't say anything, but his attention had shifted. Michael didn't look at him directly, just kept his gaze steady on the horizon, as though narrating someone else's story. "I remember once it got so late a teacher finally noticed and called my mom. She was furious. Not at him, at me. Said I embarrassed the family." Ethan was still, his expression unreadable. "I know how it feels to be the one left sitting." For the first time, Ethan's voice held something different. A flicker of curiosity edged with caution. "What did you do?" Michael let out a short breath. I stopped waiting. Eventually, I just walked home. Did that help? No, Michael said, turned to face him now. But at least I wasn't invisible. Ethan's lips pressed together. He nodded slowly. Then, quietly, sometimes I pretend I'm just another tree in the park. Something people don't notice. The word struck Michael harder than he expected. A tree in the park, just another shape, unmoving, unnoticed. The metaphor was so vivid, so painfully precise, that for a moment he couldn't respond. You're not a tree, Ethan, he said finally, his voice firmer now. You're a kid. You're supposed to be seen. Ethan looked at him, eyes sharp and serious. Then why does it feel better when I'm not? Michael had no easy answer for that. He could have said it was wrong or unfair or not the way things should be. But he sensed Ethan didn't want reassurance. He wanted truth. And the truth was, sometimes being invisible really did feel safer. Instead, Michael said, because when people don't see you, they can't hurt you. But they also can't help you. Ethan's eyes stayed on him for a long time. Then he asked, almost accusingly, why did you stop? Why did you even talk to me? The question was simple, but it landed with unexpected weight. Michael didn't rush his answer. I don't know, he admitted. Something just told me to look. Ethan tilted his head slightly, skeptical. Most people don't look. Most people are scared to see things they can't fix, Michael replied. The boy considered that. Then, in a voice so quiet it nearly disappeared into the breeze, he asked, Are you scared? Michael hesitated, not because he didn't have an answer, but because it mattered what he said next. A little, he said, but not enough to walk away. That seemed to land. Ethan nodded, looking down at his shoes again, scuffing the dirt with his toe. The sun had nearly vanished now, dipping below the houses, casting everything in the blue-gray tones of dusk. Michael stood and looked around once more, then pulled out his phone. He turned to Ethan. I think we should call someone now. Not your family. Someone who can help just in case. I'll stay here with you the whole time. Ethan didn't object. He didn't even flinch. He just asked, Are they going to be mad? Michael looked him in the eye. No, and if they are, that's not your fault. He dialed. Michael kept the phone to his ear as he paced slowly near the edge of the playground, his eyes never leaving Ethan. The dispatch operator's voice was calm and methodical, asking precise questions. Location, the boy's condition, whether there were signs of physical harm or distress. Michael answered carefully, making sure not to dramatize or diminish anything. No, the boy wasn't hurt. Yes, he was alone. No, there didn't appear to be immediate danger. But yes, someone needed to come. The operator assured him that an officer would arrive shortly, and Michael thanked her before hanging up. Ethan had moved from the swing to the low wooden edge of the sandbox, sitting with his arms wrapped around his knees. He didn't seem frightened about the call, just thoughtful. His face was turned slightly away from Michael, his eyes on the empty seesaw across the park. But Michael knew he was listening. They're on their way, he said as he approached again, voice low, casual. Ethan gave a small nod. Is it going to be a police car? Yeah, but just to talk. No lights or sirens. The boy said nothing for a while. Then he asked, Are they going to take me somewhere? Michael didn't answer immediately. I don't know yet, he said honestly. They'll probably want to talk to your mom. Make sure you're okay. Ethan turned his head slightly. She works late, sometimes until night. Michael sat down on the wooden beam a few feet from him, not too close. The streetlights began to flicker on, one by one, casting long pools of yellow light across the sidewalk. A couple walked past in the distance with a dog on a leash, the animal's collar jangling with each step. The sound was distant but oddly grounding. For a long moment, the only sound between them was the wind brushing to the branches overhead. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice so even it almost didn't register as a confession. It wasn't the first time he forgot me. Michael turned his head slightly but didn't respond, waiting. He's not my real dad, Ethan added. I guess that's why. Michael's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. Does he ever pick you up on time? Sometimes, if he remembers. Or my mom reminds him like 100 times. But she works at a clinic, and she's always busy. She says he's trying. And do you believe that? Michael asked gently. Ethan didn't answer right away. Then he shrugged. I think he tries to forget me. That's easier. Michael looked at the boy's profile, his small frame silhouetted against the fading light, his eyes unmoving. There was no malice in his voice, no resentment, just a quiet understanding of where he stood in the world. Has he ever hurt you? Michael asked. Ethan blinked. No, not like that. He just says stuff, gets annoyed, says I make too much noise, or that I'm clingy. Michael inhaled slowly. That's not okay either. Ethan looked down at his sneakers. He doesn't hit. That's what people think bad dads do. But not all of them hit. Some just forget you're there, or wish you weren't. Michael felt something cold settle in his chest. The clarity of those words, the way Ethan said them as if reciting lines he'd memorized, unsettled him more than anything else. He could almost see the invisible weight the boy carried, the shape of a life spent trying not to be a burden. Does your mom know how you feel? He asked after a long silence. Ethan hesitated. She says it's hard for him, that he didn't expect to raise a kid, that he's doing his best. Michael considered that. And what about you? You didn't expect to raise yourself. The boy looked at him, eyes dark and unreadable. Then, after a beat, he smiled, not out of happiness, but out of recognition, like Michael had said something he hadn't known he needed to hear. The sound of a car pulling into the lot caught both their attention. A black and white cruiser rolled to a quiet stop near the sidewalk. Headlights still on, but roof lights dark. Michael stood slowly, placing a hand in his jacket pocket. The other relaxed at his side. Ethan remained seated, watching the car with something like resignation rather than fear. A tall female officer stepped out, her posture calm, eyes scanning the scene with measured curiosity. She looked to be in her late 30s, hair pulled into a tight braid, a notepad in her hand. You the one who called? She asked as she approached. Michael nodded. Yeah, Michael Donovan. This is Ethan. The officer crouched slightly to Ethan's level, offering a gentle smile. Hi, Ethan. I'm Officer Ramirez. Mind if I sit next to you? Ethan gave a small shrug, and she lowered herself beside him without hesitation, folding her hands around the notepad but not opening it. I just want to ask a few questions, if that's okay. Ethan nodded again, his voice barely above a whisper. Okay. Ramirez glanced at Michael. You can stay if he wants. Ethan looked at Michael, then gave another small nod. Michael sat down again, a few feet away. Ramirez spoke with the calm rhythm of someone trained to handle fragile moments. She asked Ethan if he was hurt, if he felt safe at home, if he wanted to call his mom. Ethan answered each question with quiet honesty, never dramatic, never withholding. He wasn't trying to manipulate or impress, just tell the truth piece by piece. When she asked for his mother's number, he recited it without hesitation. Ramirez stood and walked back to her car to make the call, leaving Michael and Ethan sitting under the hum of the nearest street lamp. The world around them seemed to have paused. The trees swayed but made no sound. The swings hung still. The park empty. You did good, Michael said quietly. Ethan looked up. Is she mad? Michael didn't lie. She might be worried, but not mad. Not at you. Ramirez returned 10 minutes later. She's on her way. Sounded shaken up. Said she thought someone else had picked him up. Michael didn't comment, but his thoughts were sharp, churning. A miscommunication, maybe, or maybe something worse. An excuse, a habit, a pattern. She'll be here in about 15 minutes, the officer added, then looked at Ethan. Do you want me to stay until she gets here? Ethan looked at Michael, then back at Ramirez. No, I'm okay now. The officer nodded and offered him a small sticker from her pocket. A cartoon dog wearing a police badge. Ethan took it with a tiny smile. As Ramirez walked back to her car, Michael felt the weight of the moment settling over him again. He wasn't this boy's father. He wasn't even a friend. Just a stranger who had decided, in a brief second, not to look away. But maybe that was enough. The night had fully arrived by the time the headlights of a silver sedan curved into the parking lot, scattering long shadows across the pavement. The vehicle slowed near the curb and came to a full stop. A woman stepped out quickly, almost stumbling in her rush to close the car door. She looked no older than her early 30s, her scrubs wrinkled and stained in places with the unmistakable fatigue of someone who had worked a long shift and lived a longer life. Her eyes searched the park frantically before landing on the small figure, sitting quietly at the edge of the sandbox. "Ethan!" Her voice cracked as she hurried across the gravel, past the now-empty swings and over to where her son sat. Ethan stood slowly, his face unreadable as he watched her approach. She wrapped her arms around him, almost lifting him off the ground, pressing her face into his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with panic and guilt. "I thought he'd picked you up. I thought you were home. I didn't know." Ethan stood stiff in her embrace, his arms still at his sides. He didn't push her away, but he didn't lean into the hug either. His eyes moved past her shoulder toward Michael, who remained seated on the bench, his posture quiet and watchful. The woman finally released her son and turned to face Michael. "You stayed with him?" Michael stood now, dusting the back of his jeans instinctively. "Yes. I was jogging through and saw he was alone. I didn't want to leave him until someone came." She looked overwhelmed, brushing the hair from her forehead and glancing toward the parked cruiser where Officer Ramirez was just finishing up a note. The woman let out a heavy breath and shook her head. "I can't believe this happened again," she murmured, mostly to herself. "He promised me. He swore he'd get Ethan today. He said he left work early." Michael said nothing, allowing her to process what was clearly more than just a momentary lapse. There was a history here, a pattern stitched into the seams of this woman's life. And though Michael didn't know the details, the exhaustion in her posture spoke volumes. She turned back to Ethan, crouching to his level now. "I'm sorry. I should have checked. I should have made sure. I thought..." Ethan's voice was small but clear. "It's okay." But Michael knew it wasn't. Officer Ramirez approached him again, now with her notepad closed. She spoke to the mother directly. "I've made a note of the situation. It doesn't go on your record or anything unless there's a pattern reported. But I would advise you, strongly, to make alternative pickup arrangements if this is something that's happened before." The woman nodded quickly. "Yes, I will. I promise." Ramirez gave Ethan a small nod. "Take care of yourself, kid." Then to Michael, "Thanks for stepping in." And then she was gone. The cruiser backed out and disappeared into the night, leaving the park dimly lit and hushed again. The mother turned back to Michael, her voice softer now. "I really can't thank you enough. I don't know what would have happened if..." She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I'm Rachel." Michael offered a faint smile. "Michael, I'm sorry he had to go through that," she said, her gaze drifting to Ethan. "He's a good kid. He's been through a lot. And I'm doing everything I can, but sometimes it feels like..." She paused, clenching her jaw, "like I'm one bad day away from everything falling apart." Michael nodded slowly. He believed her. She wasn't lying. She was just drowning quietly. Rachel placed a hand on Ethan's back. "Let's go home, baby." But Ethan didn't move. He looked at Michael, his eyes full of something new, not confusion, not fear, but a kind of recognition, a sense of safety that had rooted itself slowly over the past hour. It was not dramatic or exaggerated, but it was real. "I don't want to go with him," Ethan said suddenly. Rachel froze. "What?" Ethan glanced at his mother, then back to Michael. "I don't want to go with him anymore. I don't feel safe when he picks me up." Rachel stood still, her expression flickering between concern and disbelief. "Sweetheart, he's your stepdad. He lives with us. We're trying." Ethan shook his head. "He forgets me. All the time. And then he yells when I say something. I don't want to be alone with him." Rachel looked like she'd been struck. "I didn't know you felt that way." "I didn't want to make it harder for you," Ethan replied quietly. Michael stepped back, sensing the delicate nature of what was unfolding. But Rachel turned toward him suddenly, eyes desperate. "Do you think I'm a bad mother?" The question caught him off guard. He didn't answer right away. "I think you're tired," he said. And I think you've been trying to carry too much alone. Tears welled in her eyes now, but she didn't cry. She took a deep breath and knelt beside Ethan again. Okay, she said. I hear you. I'll talk to him. And I won't ask him to pick you up anymore. We'll figure something else out. Ethan didn't speak, but he nodded just once. They stood there for another moment, the three of them under the dim park light. Rachel turned to Michael again, her voice low. Would you mind walking us to the car? Michael nodded, and together they walked a short distance. He opened the back door, and Ethan climbed in without a word. Rachel hesitated before getting behind the wheel. I know you don't know us, she said quietly, but tonight you changed something. For him, maybe for me too. Michael offered a faint nod. Take care of him. She gave him one last look, an expression full of gratitude and shame, love and failure. And then she closed the door. Michael watched the car pull away, the taillights shrinking into the night. When it finally turned the corner and disappeared, he let out a long breath, the tension in his shoulders releasing at last. The park was empty now. The silence had returned. But something in him felt different, like something dormant had stirred awake. He had not set out to be anyone's savior. But tonight, without meaning to, he had become someone that a small boy with tired eyes could trust, even if just for an evening. And as he turned and began walking home, his pace slower than usual, he realized that maybe that was enough. The following days unfolded with the quiet rhythm of a life returning to routine, but Michael felt a lingering dissonance in everything he did. The morning coffee tasted the same, the keyboard clicks at work followed their usual cadence, and his evening runs resumed on schedule. Still, something had shifted, not in the world around him, but inside. He found himself slowing down when he passed the playground where he'd met Ethan, eyes unconsciously scanning for the boy, even when he knew Ethan wouldn't be there. It wasn't just concern, it was something more, a sense of unfinished responsibility, like he'd been given a glimpse into someone else's life and then asked to simply walk away. It had been 4 days since that night. For days since he'd watched Rachel's car disappear into the dark. He hadn't expected to hear from her, and yet a part of him had hoped for it. Just a sign, a brief message saying Ethan was okay, that something had changed. But no call came, no update followed, until Thursday evening. Michael had just stepped out of the shower, towels slung over his shoulders, when his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. He hesitated before answering, his thumb hovering over the screen. When he finally pressed accept, a familiar voice spoke, nervous, rushed. Hi, Michael. This is Rachel, Ethan's mom. He stood straighter immediately. Hi. Yeah, of course. Is everything all right? There was a short pause. Yes. I mean, not perfect, but better. I wanted to thank you again. And, well, Ethan's been asking about you. Michael didn't quite know how to respond. Has he? Yes. Every day after school. He keeps saying, do you think he's still running through the park? She laughed, but it was a fragile sound, like she was still getting used to finding moments of lightness. I didn't know how you feel about it, but would you be open to maybe seeing him again? Just for a bit? Michael felt something open in his chest. Yeah, I'd like that. They agreed to meet that Saturday afternoon at a small cafe near the park. Neutral ground. Familiar enough for Ethan, but outside the context of what had happened. Michael arrived 10 minutes early, unsure why he felt nervous. He sat near the window, watching the sidewalk, his hands wrapped around a paper cup of black coffee he hadn't yet tasted. When they appeared, Ethan was holding his mother's hand loosely, his free arm wrapped around a worn backpack that looked like it had seen more miles than a kid his age should carry. Rachel waved as they approached, and Ethan's face lit up, a small but unmistakable spark of recognition that reached his eyes before his smile did. Michael stood, not quite sure of the protocol, but Ethan didn't hesitate. He walked straight up and wrapped his arms around Michael's waist, burying his face briefly against his jacket. Michael placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Hey, kid, you doing okay? Ethan pulled back and nodded. Better. Mom talked to my teacher. Now she picks me up from school every day. Or she sends my aunt. Rachel smiled as she sat down beside them. I've had to rearrange a lot of things, but it's worth it. And I told my husband, Ethan's stepfather, that we need space. Time to figure things out. Michael listened, noting the subtle change in her tone. There was no defensiveness now, no rushed explanations, just a woman trying, sincerely and visibly. Ethan opened his backpack and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. I drew this, he said, handing it to Michael. It was a sketch of a swing set, 2 figures drawn beneath it, one tall, one short. The taller one had a beard. Both had smiles. Michael unfolded it carefully. This is us. Ethan nodded. Yeah, that day. Michael looked at the drawing for a long time before folding it gently and sliding it into his coat pocket. Thank you. I'll keep it. They talked for nearly an hour. Ethan told him about school, about a book he was reading, about how his class was planning a field trip to the Science Museum. Michael listened, asked questions, laughed when Ethan mimicked his math teacher's strange voice. It was easy, natural, not something extraordinary, just connection, pure and simple, between 2 people who had crossed paths unexpectedly. When it was time to leave, Rachel stood and hesitated. I don't want to ask too much, but if he'd ever be open staying in touch, maybe see him once in a while. He really looks up to you. Michael met her gaze. I'd like that. They exchanged contact information, this time officially, as they walked back toward the park. Ethan reached for Michael's hand without asking. Michael took it instinctively. As they reached the edge of the playground, Ethan turned to him with a serious expression. You know what you did that day? Michael raised an eyebrow. What? You saw me. Michael felt the breath catch in his throat. Not just looked, Ethan said. You saw. He didn't have a reply for that. He just nodded and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Later that night, back in his apartment, Michael took the drawing out again and placed it on his fridge with a magnet. It looked small against the white surface, childlike and imperfect. But to him, it was a reminder of a moment that had passed and a connection that had not. He didn't know what would come next. He didn't know if their paths would cross again in the same way. But he knew something had changed in him, just as it had in Ethan. Sometimes, it takes nothing more than stopping in the middle of a run, slowing down, listening, and choosing not to walk away.